There's not that many purchases that I regret, but this is definitely one of them. This one right here. This is the Priolite MBX 1000 HotSync flash, and it's not just one. I had to get two. This is the MBX 500 HotSync, and luckily I stopped there. So what happened was I did a new mistake of attaching the lav mic against my jean jacket, and since I can't monitor the sound, I didn't know that it was rubbing against the jacket. I kind of broke the barriers as far as being a sub, and pretty much all the audio from that last video got f***ed up. So now I'm redoing this video in my hotel room in New York, and it's also past midnight. So by doing this video as a second take, it does allow me to basically truncate the video. I did go over the features of the flashes, the MBX 1000 and 500 HotSync flash from Priolite. Build quality was great, has a removable battery, you can adjust the power levels remotely, even though the remote was kind of huge and used like 3 AA batteries. It worked, but it's also, as you can tell, a giant piece of machinery. And so I was going over pretty much how I use my flashes with the Pentax 645Z medium format. It has a maximum shutter sync speed of, I think it's 160th of a second. Other cameras, say Canon, Nikon, have either 200 or 250th of a second. Again, I haven't used flash photography with Canon, Nikon, but only Sony and now Pentax. And you basically want a high shutter speed to be able to stop the action and give you a crisp image, especially if you're using flash. Again, if you're not using flash, you could use your maximum shutter speed, but with flashes, you do have a limit. And so for the Pentax, it is 160th. And that kind of limits you as far as what you can capture. So again, if you're doing anything with high speed stuff, so say a jumper or a dancer who jumps and there's a velocity that goes up and they eventually will land, and you want to catch them in midair, you need a high shutter sync speed to get them in midair and have it super crisp, or else you'll get these like trails of light. You may have seen it, like say during event photography, you take photos, you want some cool like ambient light trails, so sometimes you'll have a slow shutter speed, you drag the shutter by using basically 1/15th of a second or 1/30th of a second, and you allow the shutter, the ambient light kind of like burn into the image, and you can kind of introduce some shake. So you probably see some images where you could just take a flash photo in the party and just kind of move it, and that creates some movement, creates some life, and literally captures the life of the party. But I do a lot of portrait headshots, I do corporate stuff, I do lifestyle stuff, and most of the time I don't really need a high shutter speed, which brings me to essentially the conclusion of the video, which is know what type of images you're creating, see how your equipment can either make that happen, and if that isn't the case, then really find the exact reason why you're investing in a certain piece of gear. If, of course, you want to be able to go beyond what you're normally shooting, then for sure, rent the equipment, figure out if it works, and then decide from there if it's worth getting. And the way that I find if it's worth getting is that if you have to reproduce the same exact image or same exact style for the next number of shoots, and it makes more sense to essentially buy the equipment because you've calculated the certain break point between renting and owning, then sure, buy it. With the Priolites, unfortunately, that was a $3,000 investment, and I think this was 2014 or 17. I'm forgetting right now what the timeline was. And I came across this company, Priolite, going through the forums and just seeing how are people using flash with their Pentax medium format camera, and came across like a particular photographer from San Francisco. Read his blog and came across, I believe it was from him that he mentioned Priolites, and so this is where I was like, oh wow, you can use essentially the minimum or maximum flash power of the flash on any shutter speed on your camera, again from minimum to maximum, which is kind of unheard of. There is a thing called HSS, high speed sync, and I won't delve into it, but essentially with high speed sync, you get the benefits of using a high shutter speed, but the power really decreases because the flash is actually pulsating the light. And by doing so, it can give you a certain level of power, but not necessarily the highest power. So there's a major trade-off between using a higher shutter speed to stop action or to shoot in daylight and essentially make it nighttime, right? So you can cut off completely the ambient light in full brightness if you're using a particular high shutter speed, and then you would have your flash only affect the light that is from the flash would only affect the image. So the draw to Priolites is that you can utilize the maximum power. And when it comes to the conclusion of it, as far as knowing what types of images that you're creating, is that would actually help your equipment dictate what you can and cannot do. So for me, I kind of learned the hard way. I was more drawn into the possibility of utilizing the maximum power of my flashes, of the Priolites. And again, to kind of compare it, my current setup right now is the Godox 8200s. And in the size that is, I can put 3 of these flashes, and also they're a lot cheaper. I believe they're like $300 per flash, whereas the MBX 1000 HotSync was like, is it 1600 or something like that? And the other one was like 1200 or something. Lesson learned for me is that even though the 8200s from Godox are, was it 250 watts a second? Again, the MBX 1000 literally means 1000 watts second, and then 500 watts a second. I actually didn't really need that. So again, I was kind of drawn into the possibilities of utilizing certain flash power, but a lot of my stuff is actually indoors. So there's only 2 images that I actually got to fully utilize the flash. One of them was for our kitten at the time. His name is Spin. I did a composite photo where he's literally in the air on our ping pong table, and my wife on the end and I are playing, and I kind of just stacked the images in post, but tossing our kitten safely. There were some blankets on the end, or rather on the bottom of the ping pong table, and in Photoshop I masked it out. But the flash did its job. It was able to stop our cat in air, super crisp, and super happy with the image. The other one was actually of a CEO in San Francisco. We're on the rooftop, and we were still in shade, so I wasn't really battling the sun per se, but I was able to use a higher shutter speed. But funny thing enough, the remote actually broke during that shoot. So for whatever reason, either through transit or something, some type of loose connection or whatever on the remote, I was only able just to trigger it, but I couldn't actually utilize the high shutter speed. So regardless, I had my assistant boom the light, and it was modified with a soft lighter, I believe, and she looked really great. So hopefully this short video on my worst purchasing decision in the last decade that costed me $3,000 for all the bells and whistles that I thought I needed helps you decide if you need that next piece of gear or not. Just get it.